Certainly humans are sharing the information more than they had been. But so there's a range of possibilities. It's also possible that some want to share, some don't want to share. I mean, that's definitely something we see from humans. So if there's off planet, then it's possible that there's a diversity there as well. But you spoke of so many really interesting things, and you spoke about reverse engineering these technologies with NGOs. The reverse engineering programs is something that's definitely been coming out from a number of sources, and it has been for years, but just now, more recently, those congressional testimonies, multiple congressional hearings where people are saying under oath that they've been involved in formal reverse engineering programs, and I don't mean by NGOs. It's a time when certain elements of these things are definitely being discussed more. So had shared with us kind of some of his what's on the left-hand side of the page. So in terms of what should we be looking at, that maybe entities say, we want you to see this or we don't want you to see this, but the things that engineers and business people and physicists need to know, kind of that low-level strangeness, high-level strangeness. What's on that side that's shareable on the left-handed sheet of paper, and respect that there are things that maybe you can share, maybe you can't. But is there anything you would add to what Hal shared? And you shared the cloaking, which Hal's also spoken to cloaking research in another podcast. But are there others that you would share?
No, so I'm kind of limited. But one thing I did notice was looking at some of these materials is they were smart materials. Like one of the things is when these materials, you'd be looking at them and you try to reverse engineer them, that they would turn to dust. And they would do it within a minute or two. And then so you could take the dust and then set it off and get the isotopic analysis done on them. And they were extraterrestrial. But these materials, I mean, we're looking at something that's hundreds of years ahead of us. When you look under a microscope, an electron microscope, you're looking at something that's composed of very small particles that seem to be communicating with one another. So those are the things that I've been involved in that we can talk about. But, I think that's one of the reasons why extraterrestrial materials are not really available to most people, is because most of them are set to disintegrate if they get in the wrong hand.
That's really interesting what you shared. So the smart materials that then turn to dust within a minute or two. I've heard from a number of people who have spoken to how material is terrestrial versus extraterrestrial. I've heard people share a variety of ways that you can tell that. But Richard, are you able to speak to how it was extraterrestrial versus terrestrial origin?
No, well, it's the isotopic analysis of the dust that's left behind tells you it's extraterrestrial, at least where it was manufactured. But so we're looking at materials that can reconfigure themselves. So they are composed of small subunits. So the type of things I looked at were something as small as a sliver of metal that would reconfigure itself depending on where it was. It would cloak itself and it would try to blend into the environment. So the ones that this one NGO used to get a hold of were the ones that were technically broken. I guess the ones that didn't really function very well. So then you could collect them every once in a while and then try to analyze them. You could do things like split them apart. They would attempt to find each other or reconfigure. Some of the experiments they did was we took one of those and we put it on a very hot surface of about 3,000 degrees. And what it would do is it cooled the surface around itself. And then when we took the device off and then weighted again, we would find that the mass would be reduced by a certain amount. So these are really curious types of materials. So that's how we could kind of tell they were extraterrestrial, because these things weren't like decades ahead of us. They were probably hundreds of years ahead of us.
Yeah, we found that they were layered alloys at the micron levels. And none of our technologists, even in the big aerospace corporations, could make these layers bond together. So just by their physical construction, we could tell it was way beyond anything that had been manufactured in our ordinary technology here on Earth.
Yeah, that's what I saw too. You were looking at the outside of a craft or materials that came from a crashed spacecraft or something?
Yes.
Yeah, so we were looking at very little things. They seem to deposit all over the world. We were estimating there's probably trillions of these things that are deposited, and they have all sorts of functions, which really kind of implies that maybe this group is actually manipulating our species.
Mm.
But you can still acquire those. You know where to look for them. You can find. We know how to find them.
Well, if you find a hatful, why don't you send them our way and we'll take a look at them?
Yeah, that's it. So the group I used to work with, I don't talk with anymore because they got upset at me for talking. So, but I have an idea where someone could get them.
Sounds like we've got Hal. It sounds like we've got some sources in the chat. So I think we got a number. I don't want to call out the person who's telling us sourcing, but I think we do have. I guess what you're saying, Richard, is they're ubiquitous, right? And so there's a variety of sources in terms of where to get these.
Yeah. We were assuming that they're everywhere, right? Even the ones that would work, we would never be able to find because they would cloak themselves or reconfigure themselves to be something. But not all of them are functional, right?
Oh, as Diane is saying in the chat, there's a nice list of experiments and potential collaboration. So I think one of the things so for the listeners, we appreciate